Sure, sir. Identification, now.
I was verified through TSA and boarding. I can cooperate through a private verification process.
No, you're refusing a lawful request. That's suspicious.
I'm not refusing verification. I'm refusing to display sensitive credentials in a cabin.
Stand up. You're coming off this plane.
I'm federal. Forcing this in public
All right, so picture this. A man was already seated on a packed morning flight, belt buckled, phone on airplane mode, acting like every other passenger who just wanted the door to close and the plane to move. Then a flight attendant stopped in his row, leaned in and asked him for identification. Before he could even finish explaining, an airport police officer stepped into the row behind her and repeated the demand, louder, like it was already an order. The man stayed calm. He kept his hands visible. He explained that his identity had already been verified through TSA screening and the boarding process, and that pulling out sensitive credentials in public could compromise an ongoing federal operation. He offered alternatives, the kind professionals use when they're trying to solve a problem without creating a scene. The officer treated that calm refusal like it was a confession. He told the man he was being suspicious. He warned him he could be removed from the plane. Passengers stopped pretending they weren't listening. Heads turned. A few phones tilted upward like people were trying to record without making it obvious. And that's where this went from a routine flight to a public power contest in a tight aisle, with nowhere to step away. Quick thing, where are you watching from today? Drop your state or country in the comments. And if you watch stories about people staying calm while someone with authority pushes too far, hit like and subscribe, because these situations get expensive when ego takes the wheel. Now rewind. Now rewind to how it started, because this didn't begin with chaos. It began with one decision to escalate something that should have stayed discreet. The man was Special Agent Marcus Reed. He was undercover FBI, traveling under a cover identity tied to a long-running case. He wasn't on that flight for convenience. He was on that flight because he had a scheduled meeting later that day, connected to an operation that depended on timing and staying unnoticed. He had already passed the normal airport checks. TSA verified identity at screening. He cleared security. At the gate, his boarding pass scanned and matched the manifest. He boarded and sat down like every other passenger. That's why the confrontation mattered. The system had already done what it was designed to do. So when someone came back for a second ID check after boarding, it usually meant someone reported a concern without hard evidence. That's the moment where judgment matters. Before the cabin door closed, a flight attendant walked down the aisle and stopped at Reed's seat. She didn't say he had threatened anyone. She didn't say his ticket didn't match. She didn't say there was an emergency. She said she needed to confirm his identity again. Reed told her he'd already been verified through TSA and boarding. He told her he could cooperate through the airline's process if needed, but he couldn't expose sensitive credentials in a cabin full of strangers. He pushed for a private solution. Verify him through proper channels, not in front of passengers. The flight attendant didn't resolve it. She stepped back and signaled for airport police. An officer boarded and came straight to Reed's row. No quiet check near the front. No pulling him aside first. The officer positioned himself in the aisle so everyone nearby could see who had control. The officer demanded ID. Reed repeated the same thing. He was already verified through the airport process, and he could be verified again the right way, but he could not pull out sensitive credentials in public without compromising an operation. This is where the power chess started. The officer didn't treat it as, how do we verify this safely? He treated it as, you're going to do what I say. He labeled Reed's refusal as suspicious. He framed it like Reed was dodging identification. He raised the consequences out loud so everyone could hear them, comply or get removed. That public framing mattered. Once it's said in front of passengers, backing down feels like losing. And some people would rather be wrong than look wrong. Passengers started recording. Some held phones up openly, some kept them low. Either way, the room shifted. Once cameras are involved, every move becomes evidence, and every tone becomes part of the record. Reed stayed in his seat. He did not reach for anything. He did not get pulled into the officer's tempo. He kept repeating the same point. Verify him through official channels, not in the cabin. The officer signaled towards the door and called for backup. And right there, Reed understood the direction this was going. The officer wasn't trying to verify him anymore. The officer was trying to force a public win. Backup came onto the plane fast, and that's when the whole thing stopped being a check and became a removal. 2 more airport officers stepped into the aisle behind the first one. Now, Reed wasn't dealing with one person demanding ID. He was dealing with a small team standing over him while the cabin watched. And the officer made sure the cabin watched. He kept the conversation loud enough for nearby rows to hear. He kept repeating the same framing. Refusal equals suspicious. He made it sound like Reed was trying to bypass a basic rule. He ignored the part where Reed had already cleared TSA and boarded like everyone else. This is how public authority works when it's handled badly. The goal shifts from solving the issue to winning the moment. The flight attendant stayed close but stopped leading. The airline lead appeared near the front, looking like she wanted this finished quickly. Nobody wanted to be the person who told the officer to slow down. That's the part people don't like to admit. In real situations, bystanders and staff often freeze when someone in uniform takes over, even when that person is clearly escalating. Reed kept repeating the same offer. Verify him through proper channels, privately. He did not say he wouldn't be verified. He said he wouldn't expose sensitive credentials in the cabin. The officer treated private verification like an excuse. He ordered Reed to stand and hand over identification immediately. Reed didn't stand right away. He stayed seated and kept saying the same thing, because standing up into an officer who's already keyed up is how a simple moment turns into resisting on a report. Phones were up now, not just 1 or 2, multiple. People weren't even trying to hide it. At that point, Reed made a decision he'd been trying to avoid because it was the most dangerous option in a public place. He disclosed that he was federal, not details, not a speech, just the status and the warning. He was in the middle of a long-running case, and forcing him to expose credentials publicly could burn the operation. That should have been the moment the officer chose discretion. Instead, the officer treated it like a lie. He dismissed the claim as fake. He doubled down in front of the cabin and leaned into the "nobody is above the rules" line, like it was the only thing that mattered. He wasn't thinking about federal operations. He wasn't thinking about risk. He was thinking about being challenged in public and not backing down. And when someone is that committed to being right, the evidence stops mattering. The officer told Reed he was being detained. He ordered him out of the seat. Reed stood up slowly, hands visible, no sudden moves. He didn't argue for the crowd. He didn't try to win the aisle. He just complied with the physical direction while still refusing to expose sensitive credentials in public. That still wasn't enough for the officer. The officer cuffed him. That was the moment the cabin fully changed. Because once cuffs are on, everyone watching stops thinking misunderstanding. Now it looks like an arrest, and everyone's brain starts building a story around it. Reed was walked up the aisle in cuffs while passengers recorded. Some people muttered, some people protested. Most people just filmed and stared. On the jet bridge, the officer kept control tight. Reed kept repeating one point. This did not need to be public, and there were proper ways to verify him. The officer kept treating every word like another attempt to dodge. Reed was taken into an airport police office and held while the officers started writing the incident as refusal and suspicion. That paperwork mattered because the officer was building his justification. He was trying to lock in his narrative before anyone with higher authority got involved. And here's the part that hit hardest. Reed's cover didn't get burned because he showed a badge. It got burned because the arrest was public. His face was on video. The scene was going to spread. And once something like that spreads, people start connecting dots. Even if they don't know his real name, they know his face, his airline, his route, the date, the flight number. That's enough for the wrong person to start asking questions. Within hours, federal supervisors were on the phone forcing confirmation through channels the officer couldn't ignore. The truth came back clean. Reed was exactly what he said he was. But by then, the damage wasn't reversible. Because while the officer was trying to prove a point, the FBI team running Reed's case had to make a decision based on risk, not pride. And the safest decision was brutal. Abort the operation before the exposure got someone hurt. The FBI didn't treat what happened as a bad interaction. They treated it as an exposure event. Because once Reed was cuffed and walked off a plane in front of a cabin full of phones, the operation wasn't just at risk, it was compromised. That's the part the officer never understood. Reed didn't need his real name leaked for things to go wrong. All it took was a public scene tied to a date, an airport, a flight, and a face. Within hours, the video started circulating, first as a shaky clip with no context, then with captions, then with people stitching in commentary, then with passengers posting their own angles. Some people framed Reed as a problem because they only saw refused ID. Others pointed out the obvious. He had already passed TSA and boarded, and the officer escalated it into a public arrest. This is what always happens when authority overreaches in a confined space. It becomes a debate online before the paperwork is even finished. Behind the scenes, Reed's supervisor was already in containment mode. The federal team running the case started making calls that had nothing to do with defending Reed's pride and everything to do with protecting the investigation. They pulled contacts, they paused meetings, they changed locations. They started treating every planned movement as compromised. And then came the hard decision. The operation was aborted. That's not a dramatic announcement. It's a quiet shutdown that looks like nothing to the public but costs months of work. Informants get spooked. Targets go dark. People who are finally talking stop answering. The chain breaks, and rebuilding it can take years, if it's even possible again. Meanwhile, at the airport, the local department tried to hold the line. The officer's report framed Reed as suspicious and non-compliant. It leaned on the simplest narrative. The officer asked for ID, and the passenger refused. It avoided the part where Reed offered private verification options. It avoided the part where Reed stated federal status. And it definitely avoided the part where the arrest happened inside a plane full of witnesses. But witnesses are the problem with that kind of report. Multiple passengers gave statements. Some confirmed the officer escalated quickly. Some confirmed Reed repeatedly offered verification through proper channels. Some confirmed the officer dismissed Reed's federal claim without checking. And of course, the videos backed up the core issue. This wasn't a safety emergency. This was an ego situation that turned into a public arrest. Once federal confirmation came through, the department couldn't pretend they had caught someone dangerous. They had detained a verified federal agent who was traveling for work, and they had done it in the loudest way possible. That's when oversight kicked in. Airport administration wanted answers because the incident happened on a plane and delayed operations. The airline wanted distance because the cabin footage made them look like they helped escalate instead of de-escalate. The city's legal team wanted details because once a false arrest becomes public with video, the next step is predictable. And Reed wasn't just annoyed. He was damaged professionally. His cover identity was now tied to a viral confrontation. His face was now linked to an incident involving law enforcement. His travel was now something strangers could track backwards. The FBI had to assume the wrong people could find that video. And in long-running cases, assume is enough to shut everything down. A formal review started moving. Internal affairs at the department, airport police leadership, city attorneys, and federal legal staff on Reed's side documenting everything. The timeline, the verification already completed, the refusal to use private verification options, the escalation, the arrest, and the operational harm. Then came the ruling. The arrest was improper, not unfortunate, not miscommunication, improper. That ruling mattered because it set the tone for what came next. Once it's documented that the detention and arrest were unjustified, the question becomes how much it's going to cost and who is going to be left holding the bill. The city got hit with a civil rights lawsuit. It wasn't about hurt feelings. It was about unlawful detention, misuse of authority, and the obvious failure to use reasonable verification methods when they were offered. It also highlighted something departments hate seeing in writing, that the escalation happened publicly and unnecessarily, and that the officer ignored safer options because he wanted compliance on his terms. And while the lawsuit moved forward, the public pressure didn't stop. News outlets picked it up because it had everything: a plane, an arrest, video, and a confirmed federal agent. Commentators argued about rules versus judgment. Regular people asked a simpler question: why didn't the officer just verify quietly instead of turning the cabin into a stage? The department tried to control the story at first. Standard statements: we take it seriously, we're reviewing. But the video made those statements weak because the public could see the escalation with their own eyes. And the more attention it got, the harder it became to protect the officer. Because now it wasn't just about one arrest. It was about training, supervision, and whether this kind of behavior was tolerated until it finally became expensive. Once the arrest was ruled improper, everything moved from incident to liability. The city's attorneys didn't want a drawn-out public trial with multiple passenger videos, a verified federal agent, and an officer on record dismissing private verification options. That's the kind of case where every bad decision gets replayed, slowed down, and explained to a jury. So the lawsuit didn't stay theoretical for long. A civil rights case hit the department, and the number attached to it was the kind that wakes up leadership instantly: $2 million. And here's what made it worse than the money. The case wasn't complicated. It didn't require expert debate about split-second danger. It was about basic judgment. The passenger had already cleared TSA and boarded. He offered ways to verify privately. The officer escalated in the cabin anyway. The officer dismissed a federal claim without checking. The arrest was public, recorded, and avoidable. The arrest forced a federal operation to shut down. When the department tried to defend the officer at first, that support didn't last. Because once federal confirmation was documented and the video spread, backing the officer meant backing the idea that an officer could ignore safer options, create a public scene, and then justify it as rules. Leadership shifted fast. Internal findings focused on the officer's decisions, not Reed's behavior. The reports emphasized escalation, failure to use available verification channels, and unnecessary public detention. Then came the career part. The officer was fired, not suspended, not reassigned, fired. And it wasn't framed as a technicality. It was framed as conduct and judgment, turning a manageable situation into a public arrest, ignoring alternatives, and exposing the city to major liability. The department also had to deal with what departments hate most: policy changes forced by embarrassment. New procedures were rolled out at the airport. The goal was simple: stop this exact scenario from happening again. The new rules were built around common sense that should have been used the first time. If a passenger is already screened and boarded, additional ID checks require a clear reason and a supervisor. If a passenger claims federal status or sensitive credentials, officers must use a private verification process instead of demanding documents in public. De-escalation steps are mandatory before detention on an aircraft, unless there's an immediate threat. Any attempt to remove or arrest a passenger must be documented with specific facts, not just refused. Because refused isn't a reason by itself when a person is offering verification another way. That's the whole lesson. On the FBI side, Reed didn't get a victory lap. He got a closed case file. The operation he was traveling for didn't restart. The targets went quiet. The contact chain broke. The months of work didn't come back just because the city paid money later. Reed was reassigned, not as punishment, but because his cover was unusable. And that's the part people miss when they only focus on the lawsuit number. The officer lost his job. The city lost $2 million. But the real cost was the mission that got burned for no good reason. And all of it started because someone wanted compliance in public more than they wanted a correct outcome in private. That's the takeaway. Rules matter. Verification matters. Safety matters. But when authority gets used like a stage performance, it stops being about safety and starts being about ego. And ego is expensive. So let me ask you, if you were a passenger watching that go down, what would you have done? Would you record? Would you speak up? Would you stay silent and let it play out? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more stories where accountability shows up, even when it takes time.
So he's walking out with merchandise. He won't show a receipt.
Sir, put the bag down and show me your receipt.
I paid minutes ago. Store policy isn't a law. What facts of theft do you have?
This is simple. Receipt and ID. Now.
I'm not consenting to a search, and I'm leaving unless you have lawful cause to detain me.
Last time, receipt and ID or you're being detained.
What is...
A loss prevention employee thought he could stop a black man at an electronics store exit, turn a receipt demand into a public humiliation, and force compliance just by standing in the doorway. What he did not understand was that the calm man in the tailored charcoal suit, holding a reinforced shopping bag, was not just another customer he could push around, stall, and label suspicious. And at the exact moment, a young patrol officer stepped in and decided refusal meant guilt. The situation stopped being a store policy dispute and became a case that would ruin careers and force changes nobody wanted to make. At this moment, the channel wants to tell you this. We are genuinely grateful you chose to spend your time with us today, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments, city or state. And if you like stories where everyday power trips get exposed by cameras, paperwork, and real accountability, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now, zoom out for a second. This happened at Apex Digital, an electronics store inside Canyon Ridge Marketplace in Riverside, California. It was the kind of place where people walked out with small bags that cost more than a month of groceries, and where staff watched hands more than faces. Most customers complied with the receipt checks because it felt easier than arguing. Most people did not realize that a store policy is not a law, and that a customer who already paid owned the property in their bag. Judge Julian Cross did realize that. He lived in systems that ran on clear rules, and he knew the difference between a request and a detention. He also knew how quickly a simple moment could turn into something bigger if the wrong person decided their ego mattered more than the facts. And there was something else. This entire incident was being recorded from multiple angles before it even reached its peak. Not by a news crew, not by an activist group, just regular people, phones out, because the energy in the air told them this was about to go bad. Here's how it started. Julian Cross was 50, black, and dressed like someone who had a reason to be dressed that way. Tailored charcoal suit, clean lines, no loud labels, but nothing about him looked cheap or careless. He was at Canyon Ridge Marketplace for a straightforward purchase at Apex Digital. He had come for specific items, not browsing. A high-end drive array and a secured laptop, both expensive, both boxed, both the kind of products stores treated like contraband even after payment. He moved through the store like someone who did not need to impress anyone. He asked for what he needed, waited for the associate to retrieve it, and stood at the counter while the transaction finished. It was normal retail, the kind of boring moment nobody remembers. He paid minutes before all this happened. He took the items, placed them into a reinforced shopping bag, built to hold weight without tearing, and headed toward the exit. No rushing, no scanning the room, no acting like he was getting away with something. Just a customer leaving with property he bought. That should have been the end. But at the exit, Derek Harlan stepped into his path. Derek was loss prevention, wearing a yellow polo that made him easy to spot. He was not a manager, not security with a badge, not anyone with actual authority outside the store's own rules. But he carried himself like the doorway belonged to him. He positioned his body so the automatic doors could not do their job, and he made Julian stop. Derek did not start with courtesy. He did not present it like a request. He treated it like an order. He told Julian to hand over the receipt because of policy. He framed it like there was no discussion, like Julian's only role was to comply. Julian stopped and kept his posture neutral. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform for the crowd. He made it simple. He had paid minutes earlier, the items were his property now, and he did not consent to any search or to showing a receipt. Then he attempted to walk around Derek and leave. That one move is what flipped Derek. Because Derek was not prepared for calm refusal. He was prepared for nervousness, excuses, apologies, scrambling for paper, maybe a little fear. When Julian did not give him any of that, Derek had nothing to hold on to. No confession, no uncertainty, no leverage. So Derek did what people do when they confuse policy with power and realize they are losing control. He escalated. Derek raised his voice and shouted for police. He claimed Julian was walking out with merchandise. He used the language that flips a switch in people's minds. He turned a paid purchase into a theft narrative. Not because he had verified anything, but because he needed a bigger authority to back him up. And then Officer Evan Rourke showed up. Evan was a young patrol officer who arrived from the vestibule area, close enough that he had clearly been nearby. He came in fast, eyes not on Derek's story, but on the bag. He saw a black man in a suit refusing a receipt demand, and he treated that refusal like evidence. Evan did not walk to the register to confirm the purchase. He did not ask the cashier or manager to verify. He took the loss prevention claim at face value and made the bag the center of the situation. He ordered Julian to drop the bag and show the receipt. He demanded Julian's identification so he could run him. Julian stayed level. He did not argue emotions. He argued reality. He explained clearly that a store receipt policy is not law, and that Evan needed specific, articulable facts of theft to lawfully detain him. That was the moment the crowd started to gather. People in the marketplace slowed down. A few shoppers who had been near the checkout area spoke up and said they had seen Julian pay. Someone lifted a phone higher to get a clear view. Then another, then another. It was not coordinated, it was instinct. Evan reacted to the phones the same way he reacted to Julian's refusal. He treated it like defiance. He waved people back and acted like recording was interference. He focused on controlling the space, controlling the narrative, controlling the optics. And because he had already committed to the idea that Julian needed to be put in his place, he started building a justification in real time. He moved closer into Julian's personal space, using posture and proximity as pressure. He repeated the demands. He pushed the situation toward a single outcome, compliance or punishment. Julian did not give him compliance. Julian stood still, kept his hands visible, and stayed precise. He refused the search. He refused the receipt demand. He refused to be treated like a suspect without cause. And that is where this part ends, because the next step was the one Evan could not take back. With multiple cameras rolling, with witnesses saying they saw Julian pay, and with Evan now feeling watched, he made the decision that turned small misconduct into a department problem. He reached for handcuffs. Officer Evan Rourke decided the refusal was the problem. He walked up focused on Julian Cross's bag, not on verifying the purchase. He ordered Julian to drop the bag and show the receipt. He demanded Julian's ID so he could run him. Julian didn't raise his voice. He stayed still and said he paid minutes earlier, the items were his property, and he didn't consent to a search or to showing a receipt. He also told Evan that a store receipt policy wasn't a law, and that Evan needed clear facts of theft to detain him. Evan took that as defiance. Instead of checking with the cashier, Evan kept repeating demands. Derek Harlan, the loss prevention employee, stayed at the doors and backed Evan up by insisting Julian was leaving with merchandise. People nearby started speaking up. Two shoppers said they saw Julian pay at the register. Someone pointed toward the front lanes and said the store could confirm it right now. More phones came out because the officer was getting louder and standing closer. Evan waved people back and treated filming like a problem. He told them to step away and stop listening to what they were saying about the purchase. Julian stayed calm. He didn't argue with the crowd. He kept his hands visible and repeated that he wasn't consenting and that he was leaving. Evan moved in and grabbed Julian's arm. Julian didn't swing or try to run. He kept his balance and told Evan he wasn't resisting. Evan pulled Julian's arm behind his back anyway and pushed him against the glass near the entrance. Evan cuffed him tight. While doing it, Evan said Julian was resisting. He said it loudly so the crowd would hear it, even though Julian wasn't fighting. Evan then started adding reasons out loud to justify the arrest: disorderly conduct, obstruction, resisting. The situation had started over a receipt demand, and Evan turned it into a full arrest by labeling refusal as a crime. Derek went quiet once the cuffs were on. He had already gotten what he wanted: police control of the situation. Now the store employee wasn't the one in front of the cameras anymore. Bystanders kept saying they saw Julian pay. Evan ignored them and walked Julian outside. Evan took the shopping bag as property for the case, even though it contained boxed items from the store, and multiple witnesses were saying the purchase was real. Outside, Evan pushed Julian toward the patrol car and put him in the back seat. Julian stayed composed and kept speaking clearly, like he was making sure the record was clean. Evan drove him to the precinct like this was routine, but the arrest report and the booking process were about to force Evan to explain the original reason for the stop. And once Julian's ID was checked, the situation would change fast. Booking is where stories like this either get quietly buried or blow up into something that can't be contained. Evan Rourke walked Julian Cross into the precinct like he expected a quick process and a clean report. He talked like the arrest was justified. He treated the cuffs in the bag like proof that he was in control. At the desk, Sergeant Marisol Alvarez took one look at Julian's posture and the way Evan was presenting it, and she asked the basic question that should have been asked at the store. She asked what the detention was based on. Evan said Julian refused to show a receipt and wouldn't give ID, and that it turned into obstruction and resisting. Alvarez didn't nod along. She asked what the theft facts were. She asked whether anyone verified the purchase at the register. She asked what exact actions were being called resisting. Evan didn't have clean answers. He had labels. Alvarez kept her tone controlled, but she didn't treat it like normal, because refusal to show a receipt wasn't probable cause. And he didn't do what I told him wasn't a lawful reason to arrest someone. Julian stood there cuffed and composed. He didn't argue. He didn't insult anyone. He let the questions expose the thin foundation on their own. Then Alvarez moved to the inventory step. They took Julian's property for safekeeping: wallet, keys, phone, watch, the shopping bag, and the items inside. Everything got listed. When Alvarez checked Julian's identification, the mood changed immediately. It wasn't a small reaction. It was the kind of instant shift that happens when someone realizes this isn't just another messy stop. The ID confirmed Julian Cross was a United States federal judge. Alvarez didn't debate it and didn't stall. She ordered the cuffs removed right there. She told another staff member to step in and take over the paperwork. She told Evan to step away. Evan tried to talk through it like it was still his scene. Alvarez cut that off and separated him from the process. She also directed that Evan's equipment and reports be handled through supervision, not casually. Julian got his hands free and asked for his phone. He asked for the watch commander. He spoke clearly and gave one instruction that made it obvious he was already thinking about evidence preservation. He said all body camera and dash camera footage needed to be preserved, and that there were to be no gaps, no deletions, and no excuses about technical issues. Alvarez took that seriously. She didn't argue with him about it. She started making calls up the chain. That brought in Lieutenant Connor Bennett, the watch commander. Bennett came out with the practiced tone of someone who tries to fix problems fast. He offered an apology and called it a misunderstanding. He tried to frame it like it could be cleaned up with a quick release and corrected paperwork. Julian didn't accept that framing. He made it clear the issue wasn't confusion. The issue was that an officer took a receipt policy, treated it like law, escalated it into an arrest, and then tried to justify it by stacking charges. He also made it clear that the store never verified anything before he was cuffed and taken away. Bennett tried to keep it contained. Julian didn't let it stay contained. Julian made calls, not emotional calls, practical calls, the kind that trigger outside review, the kind that put people on notice that this will not be handled with a quiet internal note, and we'll address it. Alvarez continued doing what she could control, separating what happened from what Evan claimed happened. She ensured property was properly documented. She ensured the timeline was noted. She ensured supervisors were aware of the original stated basis for the arrest. Evan, meanwhile, was suddenly in the position he put Julian in earlier, being questioned, being watched, and having his decisions examined. Julian was released without the charges Evan had been talking about in the storefront. The cleanup Bennett wanted couldn't happen cleanly, because there was too much video, too many witnesses, and now the identity of the person they arrested meant every shortcut would be scrutinized. When Julian walked out of the precinct, he didn't act like someone who had won. He acted like someone who was making sure the next steps happened correctly. And outside that building, the story was already moving. Because while Evan was trying to write his version of events, people at Canyon Ridge Marketplace were uploading theirs. By the next morning, the footage from Canyon Ridge Marketplace was everywhere. It wasn't one clip. It was multiple angles. The store entrance, the vestibule, the sidewalk outside. People had recorded the whole sequence. Derek Harlan blocking the doors, Officer Evan Rourke demanding a receipt like it was a legal requirement, witnesses saying they saw Julian pay, and Evan escalating anyway. The video spread fast because it was easy to understand. A calm, well-dressed black man was arrested over a receipt dispute. The officer didn't verify the purchase. The crowd tried to correct it. The officer ignored them. Then he cuffed the man and started calling it resisting. The Riverside Police Department went into damage control. They put out a statement that used careful wording. It avoided admitting wrongdoing. It leaned on review language. It avoided the part everyone could see. The original reason for the confrontation was a store receipt demand, not confirmed theft. That didn't work because people had eyes. Local reporters started asking basic questions. Why didn't the officer verify at the register? Why did the arrest happen without confirmed theft? And why were extra charges mentioned on scene when the underlying reason was a receipt refusal? The story grew because the video didn't leave much room for creative interpretation. Behind the scenes, the city got nervous for a different reason. Julian Cross wasn't just a regular victim who might give up after an apology. He understood records. He understood timelines. He understood how internal reports get written to protect the officer and how video cuts through that. And he made it clear from the booking desk that footage preservation was not optional. That one detail mattered, because missing footage becomes its own scandal. Julian's legal team moved quickly. They didn't build the case around outrage. They built it around steps that were skipped and actions that were not legally supported. They requested bodycam and dashcam footage, dispatch and radio traffic, the store's internal security video, the arrest report drafts and any edits. The case didn't stay focused on just Evan. It widened to the pattern that allowed a young officer to turn a receipt policy into handcuffs in front of a crowd without someone stopping it earlier. It raised questions about training, supervision, and how often refusal was being treated as probable cause. Apex Digital also got pulled into it. Their loss prevention practice became part of the story, blocking exits, treating receipt checks like a right instead of a request, calling police without confirming a purchase. The store couldn't pretend it was just a police problem when the whole thing started with their employee physically preventing a customer from leaving. As the investigation moved, Evan's situation got worse. Video made his report hard to defend. If he wrote that Julian attempted to flee, the footage showed Julian moving normally and trying to exit around a person blocking the doors. If he wrote that Julian interfered with an investigation, The footage showed Evan never verifying a theft at all before grabbing Julian. If he wrote resisting, the footage showed Julian not fighting, not striking, not trying to run. And the more Evan had to lean on vague language, the more obvious it became what happened. He punished a refusal and tried to cover it with charges. Internal Affairs opened a formal review. Outside oversight got involved. The city attorney's office tracked the story closely because they knew what juries do with clear video and bad decision-making. The department placed Evan on administrative leave. Then the next steps followed the usual path: equipment review, report review, interviews, and supervisors trying to explain why none of this was stopped sooner. Derek Harlan didn't escape it either. He was interviewed about why he blocked the doors, why he ordered a receipt instead of requesting it, and why he claimed Julian was walking out with merchandise without confirming what happened at the register. The store had to answer for what kind of loss prevention training leads to physical obstruction over a receipt. The city didn't want this in front of a jury. A jury would see the video first, then hear policy was treated like law, then hear the officer never verified the purchase, then hear the charges were stacked after the fact. And the city knew jurors tend to punish that behavior. So the city moved toward settlement. Not because they suddenly became moral, but because it was the safer option. A public trial would dig into complaint history, supervision failures, and how often similar stops happened to people who didn't have Julian's resources or position. The settlement came with money and conditions. Julian's side pushed for changes that mattered, not just a check. Clear direction that receipt refusal alone is not a detention basis. Training on lawful detention standards and articulation requirements. Stronger supervision review for arrests that start as non-compliance. Guidance on public recording so officers stop treating cameras like a threat. Documentation standards that match video reality, not ego. The department agreed because the alternative was worse. Evan's career collapsed the way it usually does when video and records line up against an officer. First leave, then discipline, then separation from the job. Whether it ended as termination or resignation, the result was the same. His name became attached to a case that departments don't want to inherit. And Julian Cross didn't do interviews to brag. He didn't need to. His impact was in the trail he forced them to follow. He refused to let it be called a misunderstanding. He refused to accept a quiet release as the solution. And he made sure the footage didn't disappear. That's what made this different. Because most people in Julian's position don't have the power to force the system to explain itself. He did. And once the record was locked in, the system had no clean exit. So here's the question for you. If you were Julian, would you have handed over the receipt just to avoid the conflict? Or would you have held the line the way he did? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you've ever been in a situation where someone tried to turn policy into control, share what happened. And if you want more realistic stories where cameras, procedure, and accountability expose abuse of power, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.
Sir, stop right there. We need to check you.
What's the reason?
Give me your identification.
I can be verified. I'm federal law enforcement on an authorized assignment. Call dispatch or call a supervisor and confirm.
No, ID first.
I'm offering the fastest way to resolve this in public. Verify me.
Lead, we can call it in. He's offering a supervisor contact. That's quick.
Not here. We're moving him.
Confirmed. Individual Special Agent Jamal Reed, authorized assignment.
All right, okay, we're good. Simple mix-up. It wasn't a mix-up when verification was offered and refused.
An ICE team led by Agent Nolan Briggs surrounded a black man in the Harborview Convention Center's main concourse and acted like the stop was already solved. They blocked his path, tightened their circle, and started issuing commands like he was a confirmed grab. The man stayed controlled and kept trying to end it the fastest way possible by offering a direct verification route through dispatch and a supervisor. Briggs refused to verify anyway and pushed the encounter towards detention in the busiest, most recorded part of the building. What Briggs didn't know was that the man he was escalating on wasn't a target at all. He was Special Agent Jamal Reed, an undercover federal investigator on an authorized assignment. And this entire moment was being captured on ICE body cameras and bystanders' phones in a packed public space. At this moment, we want to tell you that we're incredibly grateful that you've chosen to spend your time with us today. Your support keeps this channel alive and thriving. Now, real quick, tell us where you're watching from today, state or country. Drop it in the comments. And if you like stories where accountability comes from cameras, timestamps, and people staying calm under pressure, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Reed stood near a line of vendor banners and rolling suitcases, with people flowing around him like water. Briggs stood close enough to control Reed's space. 2 agents flanked Reed's sides. Another agent hung back, watching the crowd and scanning for anyone moving in. Reed kept his hands visible and told them he was a federal agent working an authorized assignment. He didn't argue about ego. He didn't raise his voice. He gave them options. He told them they could call dispatch. He told them they could call his supervisor. He told them exactly how to verify him fast. Briggs treated that like a trick. Briggs responded like Reed was trying to talk his way out of something, and he kept escalating the control. He demanded compliance first and verification later. He moved the stop from a quick check into a detention posture in public, with dozens of phones pointed at them. Here's the part people miss. The whole story wasn't about whether Reed could prove who he was. It was about whether Briggs would allow verification to happen at all. Before that moment, Reed's day had started like any other undercover job that required being invisible in plain sight. He arrived at Harborview mid-morning, dressed like a regular attendee. No tactical look, no loud confidence, just a casual outfit and a conference badge that matched his cover roll. He moved through registration, checked the room schedule, and walked the main concourse once to get eyes on the layout. He clocked where private security stood. He clocked where local police were posted. He clocked where cameras sat above the escalators and near the service hallway doors. His authorized assignment was tied to a federal investigation that touched the convention's vendor operations. Nothing dramatic, no movie stuff. It was the kind of case built on receipts, patterns, and quiet observation. Reed had a scheduled contact window and a location plan that depended on him staying calm and non-threatening. His job was to watch, document, and confirm identities connected to a wider inquiry. He also knew how stops like this could happen. So he carried a clean verification route in his head. Supervisor contact, dispatch process, field office line. He knew which details to give and which details to protect, because undercover work didn't mean he had the freedom to say everything in public. On the other side of the building, Nolan Briggs was running his own mission that day, and he ran it like the answer was always force first. Briggs was leading an ICE team assigned to the area for enforcement operations, tied to tips and follow-ups. That morning, his team got an anonymous call that claimed a suspicious man was near staff corridors, moving between vendor spaces, looking like he didn't belong, possibly using a badge that didn't match. The tip was vague, but it had the kind of language that makes people move fast, especially when the caller sounds confident. Briggs didn't slow down to verify the tip before going hands-on. He treated it like a green light. He pulled his team together and moved toward the main concourse. They didn't coordinate with convention security in a meaningful way. They didn't run a quick check through the on-site liaison before approaching. They walked in ready to control a person first and sort out facts later. One agent on the team, Priya Desai, wasn't comfortable with that approach. She wasn't a speech person. She didn't grandstand. She just asked practical questions the way experienced agents do when they've seen operations go bad. She wanted specifics about what the tip actually said. She wanted a description. She wanted to confirm if the target was supposed to be there. Briggs shut down the caution with urgency and rank. He pushed the team forward, and that's how Reed, an undercover federal agent doing his job, ended up surrounded in a crowded public concourse because someone made a call and someone else decided verification was optional. When Briggs's team made contact, Reed tried to end it the correct way. He told them he was federal. He told them he could be verified immediately. He told them to call dispatch and gave them a supervisor route that would take minutes, not hours. He stayed in place and kept his hands visible. He didn't reach for anything. He didn't posture. Briggs responded by narrowing Reed's options instead of checking them. He took Reed's calm as resistance. He treated Reed's offer to verify as stalling. Desai, standing slightly behind Briggs, looked like she wanted to intervene without stepping on a team lead in front of a crowd. Her body camera captured her tone shifting, the kind of shift that happens when someone realizes they're about to be attached to a mistake. Bystanders noticed fast. The second people saw the agents forming a tight circle. The phones came up. A woman near the food kiosks started recording from close range. A few feet away, someone else recorded from a higher angle near the escalator. You could tell this wasn't one camera. It was many, and it was all happening under bright convention lighting with clear lines of sight. Reed pointed out that they were in public, surrounded by witnesses, and that verification was the fastest and safest route for everyone. He offered the same solution again. Call it in, confirm, and move on. Briggs refused again. Briggs escalated control language into detention steps. He directed agents into positions that cut Reed off from his bag and phone. He signaled for hands-on control without making verification calls. He pushed the stop away from a simple identity check and toward moving Reed out of the open concourse. At that point, the stop stopped looking like caution and started looking like a decision. Here's the part people miss. When someone refuses verification repeatedly, it's not confusion, it's a choice. And cameras don't just capture what people do. They capture what they refuse to do. Reed stayed controlled and kept repeating the same procedural answer. Verify him through dispatch and a supervisor. He didn't threaten. He didn't bargain. He just kept offering the route that would end the stop clean. Briggs treated that calm like a challenge. Convention security started drifting closer, not aggressively, but close enough to be on record as present. People around them slowed down. The concourse flow tightened. You could see the moment the crowd realized this wasn't ending quickly. Briggs then pushed the encounter into the point of no return for the team's reputation. He moved it toward detention anyway, despite Reed giving him multiple clean chances to verify. And Reed understood something in real time. This wasn't about paperwork. This was about control. And Briggs was willing to be wrong in public as long as he didn't have to be corrected. Briggs pushed the stop past a quick check and into a detention posture in the middle of the concourse. He directed his agents to control Reed's movement and treat him like he was already identified, even though Reed kept giving them a clean verification path that would have ended the encounter in minutes. Reed told the team he was a federal agent on an authorized assignment and offered a supervisor contact and dispatch route. He did it the way the trained investigators do it in public. Enough information to verify, not enough to compromise an operation. He also made it clear he would not consent to being moved into a back area while still being misidentified. Desai, one of the agents on Briggs' team, pressed for the obvious step. Call it in and confirm. Her body camera captured that she raised verification as a solution, not an argument. Briggs rejected it and kept control-focused instructions going instead. That refusal mattered because it wasn't a missed step. It was repeated. The body cameras caught the sequence. Reed offered verification. Briggs declined. Reed offered again. Briggs escalated again. Phones were already up around them. A woman close to the group recorded steadily from a few feet away. Another angle came from higher, near the escalators. Convention security moved closer after noticing the attention, and the crowd slowed down. They asked what was happening, and Briggs responded by asserting federal authority and dismissing their involvement. Security did not intervene physically, but they stayed within earshot and sightline, which made the stop harder to control through narrative later. Briggs then tried to shift the location. He steered the situation toward a service hallway area where there would be fewer witnesses and less ambient recording. Reed refused to go voluntarily without identity confirmation. He did not become physical. He did not threaten. He kept his stance stable and kept repeating the same instruction. Verify first through dispatch and supervisor. Here's the part people miss. Once a person offers immediate verification and law enforcement refuses, the issue stops being confusion and becomes intent. Video makes that difference obvious. As the agents attempted to move Reed, the crowd reaction changed from curiosity to alarm. People started calling out that they were recording. Convention staff began making calls of their own. The incident was now linked to the venue, not just the agents, and that created its own urgency. Those calls reached the local field office fast. The report wasn't vague. It included the location, the crowd size, and the fact that multiple recordings were already happening. That combination forces escalation in an agency chain because it turns a field decision into a documented exposure problem. Supervisor Marisol Chen was notified and asked a direct question. Had they verified the person's identity yet? Briggs didn't have a clean answer because the verification step had been offered and ignored. Chen ordered the call to be made immediately. This time, Briggs couldn't stall. With the field office involved, the decision was no longer his. An agent contacted dispatch and ran the verification route Reed had provided. Confirmation came back quickly. Reed was exactly who he had said he was. Special Agent Jamal Reed, undercover, authorized assignment. The moment that confirmation landed, the detention had no procedural cover. The team had to release him right there, in the same concourse where they had surrounded him. There was no way to reframe it without the cameras contradicting them. Their own body cams matched the bystander footage, and dispatch logs anchored the timeline. Reed didn't argue for an apology in the moment. He went straight into preservation mode. He recorded the key times. When contact began, when he first offered verification, when Briggs refused, when the field office got involved, when dispatch confirmed, and when he was released. He identified the closest witnesses who had been filming and made sure names and contact details were captured. He also coordinated with convention security to ensure they documented the incident from the venue side, including which staff were present and which cameras covered the area. Then he moved on the body camera issue immediately. He made formal preservation requests through the proper channels, so the footage couldn't be quietly overwritten under normal retention cycles. He secured copies of bystander recordings directly instead of relying on posts or social media clips, because he wanted original files with intact timestamps and metadata. Desai's Bodycam became a key piece because it showed internal warning and refusal. It established that the option to verify was raised on scene and dismissed anyway. Briggs tried to treat the outcome like a simple mix-up and end it there. Reed didn't. He understood what the evidence now showed. An anonymous tip was treated as certainty. A black man was detained in public without basic verification. And the only reason it ended was supervisor intervention after outside pressure. Within hours, clips from the concourse were circulating. Not because someone edited a story around it, but because the raw sequence was hard to explain away. Multiple angles showed the same thing. Reed offered quick verification routes early, Briggs refused to verify, the stop escalated anyway, and the release only happened after the field office was pulled in. Convention staff filed their own incident notes because it happened on their floor, in front of their cameras, during a major event. Bystanders shared recordings with timestamps. Reed didn't rely on the internet version of the story. He built his own evidence package. He logged the timeline in plain order. First contact, first verification offer, each refusal, the attempt to move him off the concourse, the point the field office became involved, the dispatch confirmation, and the release. He attached the preservation requests he made for body camera footage. He secured original files from bystanders who filmed close enough for clean audio. He collected witness contact information while memories were fresh. Then he escalated it through formal channels. Reed filed complaints through the appropriate federal processes and then filed a federal civil rights lawsuit The case didn't depend on opinions or interpretations. It depended on recorded steps. The central claim was simple. The team had repeated chances to verify identity fast, refused anyway, and detained him without lawful justification once verification was offered and available. Briggs's side tried to frame it as a good faith stop based on an anonymous tip. That defense would have been stronger if the team had verified quickly and made a correction. The problem was, the footage showed the opposite. The recordings didn't show confusion. They showed refusal. Here's the part people miss. In court, what destroys a defense isn't usually the original suspicion. It's the moment someone is offered an easy, professional way to confirm facts and chooses not to. Discovery pulled in everything Reed expected. Dispatch logs, internal call records, body camera retention data, and supervisory notes. Reed's legal team didn't have to guess what happened. They lined up the timestamps across systems. Every time Reed offered a supervisor wrote, the body cams captured it. Every time verification was dismissed, it was recorded. The longer Briggs delayed the call, the weaker his position became, because the delay wasn't tied to safety or logistics. It was tied to control. Desai's footage became a key piece. It showed internal awareness that verification was available and sensible. It established that the refusal wasn't a misunderstanding shared by everyone on scene. It was a decision driven from the top of that team in that moment. As the case moved forward, the short-term consequences started landing before the trial. Briggs was pulled from frontline operations while internal review ran. The team's actions were reviewed against policy and training standards. The agency issued statements that avoided admitting fault but emphasized professionalism and procedure. That didn't stop the footage from shaping public understanding. People didn't need a press conference to interpret what they watched. Reed also faced real-world fallout that wasn't just legal. Undercover work depends on anonymity and routine. A public stop in a convention center, filmed at close range, created exposure risk. His agency had to evaluate the operational impact, adjust assignments, and document the disruption. That became part of damages because it tied the unlawful detention to real professional harm, not just embarrassment. When the trial arrived, it wasn't built around dramatic testimony. It was built around sequence. Reed's attorneys walked the jury through the concourse timeline in clean segments. They didn't argue feelings. They showed the offers to verify, the refusals, and the escalation. They matched body cam audio with bystander videos to confirm the same statements were captured from different angles. They then anchored the ending with dispatch confirmation timing, showing how fast it ended once someone finally followed the verification route Reed had offered from the start. Briggs testified and attempted to justify the detention as necessary for officer safety and investigation integrity. The problem was the recording showed Reed staying controlled and offering verification that reduced risk, not increased it. The jury was left with one question. If verification was available and would resolve the stop quickly, why refuse it repeatedly and detain anyway? The defense could not give an explanation that fit the record. The verdict came back unanimous for Reed. The judgment was $10 million. The award reflected not just the unlawful detention, but the documented refusal to verify, the public nature of the incident, and the foreseeable professional damage caused by exposing an undercover agent in a crowded venue. After the verdict, consequences moved fast. Briggs' career ended. He didn't get reassigned quietly. The case record was now public, time-stamped, and tied to a jury finding. The agency also faced pressure to address the team culture that allowed verification to be treated as optional. Disciplinary actions hit multiple levels. Not just the lead decision-maker, but supervision and training structures that failed to prevent the behavior or correct it earlier. Then came the reforms, because the case created a template that administrators couldn't ignore. Policy changes focused on 3 areas: One mandatory verification triggers. If a stopped person claimed law enforcement or federal affiliation, an officer...
You, let me see your ID.
What's the lawful reason you need my ID?
Don't argue. ID, now.
I'm not refusing. I'm asking for the legal basis before I comply.
Stand up. You're being detained if you don't comply.
I'm complying. State what crime you believe I committed.
The officer stood too close to the counter, voice up, shoulders squared, and he kept pointing at Jordan Wallace like Jordan had done something that needed immediate control. Ethan Klein told everyone in that cafe that Jordan had to show ID right now and step away from the register. Jordan didn't raise his voice. He stayed planted, hands visible, and asked what the lawful reason was. Klein didn't answer that. He repeated the demand, then warned that if Jordan didn't comply immediately, he was going to be detained. That was the moment the room shifted. People stopped talking. The barista froze with a cup in hand, and a couple of phones came up quietly, like people already knew this was about to get ugly. Quick thing, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Country, state, city, wherever. And if you watch stories where the truth is in the footage and accountability actually lands, hit like and subscribe because this one only makes sense once you see how the report and the body cam didn't match. Now rewind because this didn't start with shouting. It started like a normal weekday lunch rush. The cafe sat on a corner near a courthouse and a few government buildings. It was the kind of place where suits grabbed espresso, students typed on laptops, and regulars knew the staff by name. People rotated in and out fast. Nobody expected drama. And most people, when a uniform walked in, automatically made space and kept their eyes down. Jordan Wallace didn't come in looking for attention. He was a black man in his early 40s, fit, calm, and tired in the way you get when you've been traveling and working long hours. He was in town on duty-related travel. He wasn't in uniform. He wasn't trying to broadcast what he did for a living. He ordered a coffee, waited his turn, and kept it simple. What most people in that cafe didn't know was that Jordan was an active senior deputy U.S. Marshal. He understood law enforcement policies, constitutional limits, and exactly how fast a small misunderstanding could turn into something bigger when ego got involved. Ethan Klein walked in already scanning. He was a patrol officer, late 20s to early 30s, with that rigid posture some officers use when they want the room to adjust around them. His body cam was on. It captured everything from the moment he entered, including his tone and what he chose not to explain. Klein focused on Jordan almost immediately. Not the loud group, not the guy cutting the line. Jordan standing quietly at the counter. Klein moved in and started questioning him right there, loud enough for people nearby to hear. He demanded identification and asked what Jordan was doing there. Jordan didn't argue about the request itself. He asked the important question first. What was the reason for the stop? What was the suspicion? What was the legal basis? That question mattered. Because without a clear lawful basis, it wasn't a lawful detention. It was just a demand, backed by a badge in a public place. Klein didn't respond with a reason. He responded with pressure. He told Jordan to stop being difficult. He told him to step back. He told him to produce ID immediately. Jordan kept his voice even. He didn't insult Klein. He didn't threaten anything. He did what trained professionals do when a situation starts sliding. He slowed it down. He made his hands visible. He suggested an off-ramp. He indicated that he could identify himself properly if Klein called a supervisor or handled it the right way, away from the crowd. Klein didn't take the off-ramp. He took it as a challenge. This is where the power chess started. Klein didn't have a clear reason to detain Jordan, so he tried to build one in real time. He treated Jordan's calm insistence on a lawful basis as refusal. Then he treated refusal as non-compliance. Then he started framing the situation like Jordan was causing a scene, even though the only raised voice in the early moments was Klein's. The barista tried to keep the line moving. The cafe manager stepped closer, not to interfere, but to protect the business and calm the room. The manager asked what was going on and whether they needed to move the conversation outside. Klein shut that down fast and told the manager to stay out of it. Jordan stayed focused. He kept repeating the same 2 points. He wasn't doing anything illegal, and if the officer was making a demand, the officer needed to explain the lawful reason for it. That's not disrespect. That's the standard. But in situations like this, some officers treat knowing your rights like an act of defiance. Klein escalated again. He told Jordan he was being detained now. Still no clear articulation of a crime, no clear explanation of suspicion. Just a shift into control mode. Jordan asked whether he was free to leave. Klein didn't answer directly. He told Jordan to turn around. Jordan didn't swing, didn't yell, didn't flinch. He stayed calm and moved carefully, like someone trying not to give the officer any excuse to claim a threat. But Klein had already decided what story he wanted the footage to support. Klein reached for Jordan's arm. Jordan instinctively tensed, not to fight, but to keep his balance and maintain control of his body in a crowded space. Klein immediately labeled that as resistance. He said it out loud, so the body cam would capture the phrase. That tactic shows up a lot. If an officer can't clearly justify the stop, the next move is often to turn the person's hesitation, confusion, or basic physical reaction into resisting, so the focus shifts from the officer's basis to the person's behavior. Now everyone was watching. A patron near the window started recording openly. Another person whispered that Jordan hadn't done anything. Someone else told the person recording to keep filming. The staff looked scared because they've seen how quickly the wrong moment can turn into a lawsuit, a viral clip, or both. Klein ordered Jordan's hands behind his back. Jordan complied in the most controlled way possible, still insisting he wasn't resisting and still asking what he was being arrested for. Klein didn't provide a clean answer. He kept repeating compliance commands and talking over Jordan's questions. Then the cuffs went on. The sound of the ratchet in a quiet cafe is sharp. It turns an argument into a public event. The whole place went silent except for Klein giving commands and the body cam capturing every word. Jordan tried one more off-ramp. He indicated he was law enforcement, that this could be verified quickly, and that Klein needed to slow down and call a supervisor. Klein dismissed it immediately. He treated it like a lie told by someone trying to dodge consequences. He said that part out loud, too, like he wanted the camera to hear his certainty. And that was the real problem. Certainty without basis. Control without explanation. Klein marched Jordan toward the door, past staring customers, past the counter staff, past the manager who looked like they wanted to intervene but didn't want to get arrested next. Jordan stayed upright, calm, and deliberate. No yelling, no theatrics, just controlled breathing and a steady focus on procedure. Outside, Klein positioned Jordan near the patrol car. The body cam angle caught Jordan turning his head slightly to keep the officer in view, to keep the situation documented, and to keep his own tone consistent. Jordan again pushed for verification. He didn't beg. He didn't threaten. He made it clear there was a simple way to resolve this. Klein didn't take it. Instead, he started narrating his justification in fragments. Words like disorderly, obstruction, failure to comply, without connecting them to a specific action that actually fit those terms. That's the tell. When the language gets broad and generic, it usually means the foundation is weak. And right as Klein moved to place Jordan into the back of the unit, another vehicle pulled up hard. A supervisor arrived. Sergeant Maria Chen stepped out, looked from Klein to Jordan, and immediately read the scene the way experienced supervisors do. Crowded location, public arrest, witnesses recording, and an officer who looked amped up instead of controlled. She approached with the first question that decides everything in moments like this. She asked Klein, in plain terms, what his lawful basis was. And Klein didn't have a clean answer ready when it mattered most. Sergeant Maria Chen didn't walk into the scene loud. She walked into it like she already understood the risks: a public arrest, multiple witnesses filming, and an officer whose energy didn't match what the situation looked like. She took control immediately. She directed Klein to step back and explain, clearly and in order, what crime he believed Jordan had committed and what specific actions supported detention and arrest. Klein gave a scattered answer. He leaned on broad labels and tried to backfill justification after the fact. Chen didn't accept labels. She pushed for facts. Then she shifted to Jordan. Jordan stayed calm and did the same thing he'd been doing the whole time. He kept his hands visible, kept his tone controlled, and kept steering the situation toward verification instead of confrontation. He didn't posture. He didn't argue to win. He focused on ending the wrongful arrests safely. Chen asked Jordan for identification and credentials, but she did it the right way, with distance, with care, and without treating a request like a command backed by threats. Jordan told her he had federal law enforcement credentials on him and that verification could be done quickly through proper channels. Chen didn't ask Klein to handle it. That mattered. When a supervisor takes over, it's not just about rank. It's about removing the ego factor and recentering policy. Jordan produced his credential wallet. Chen visually checked the photo, the name, the agency designation, and the expiration details. She didn't snatch it. She didn't turn it into a tug-of-war. She treated it like evidence that needed to be verified, not challenged. Klein tried to dismiss it again, and he did it with the same tone he'd used inside the cafe, as if the problem was Jordan's attitude rather than the lack of lawful basis. Chen didn't let him keep driving the narrative. She moved a few steps away and called it in. She contacted dispatch and requested verification through appropriate channels. She also called the watch commander to document that she had a potentially wrongful arrest unfolding in public, and that she was pausing the situation pending confirmation. While that happened, Chen managed the scene like a supervisor who'd done it before. She assigned another responding unit to stand by, not as muscle, but as a buffer. She made sure the crowd didn't close in. She told the cafe staff they could return to work, and that she would get their statements later. She also noted the people recording, because she knew those videos would exist no matter what the department wanted later. Jordan stayed cuffed during the first few minutes of verification, because once cuffs are on, officers tend to default into caution. Chen didn't pretend that was ideal. She treated it as temporary and time-limited. She kept the verification moving. Dispatch came back with partial information first. Jordan's name didn't light up the way local police names do because federal databases and local systems don't always play nice. That's where a lot of officers stop and decide they were right all along. Chen didn't. She escalated the verification to the right source instead of using the system limitation as an excuse. Jordan provided a direct agency contact pathway. Chen placed the call. A duty officer confirmed who Jordan was and confirmed his status. That should have ended everything, and it did, but not smoothly. Chen walked back, now holding the confirmed verification in her hand, like a switch that changed the entire legal situation. She directed Klein to remove the cuffs immediately. Klein hesitated for a second, like he was deciding whether to comply or argue. Chen didn't give him space for debate. She made it clear this was no longer optional. Klein removed the cuffs. Jordan rolled his wrists once, not dramatically, just checking the stiffness. He didn't take victory laps. He didn't taunt. He didn't raise his voice. He stayed professional because he knew exactly what happens when a wrongfully arrested person starts celebrating in the moment. It gives the other side something to clip, something to label, something to twist. Chen addressed the crowd next briefly and without theatrics. She didn't apologize on behalf of the city out loud, because supervisors rarely do that in public while everything is still unfolding. But she made it clear Jordan was being released and that the situation was being handled. Then she did something else important. She separated Klein from Jordan. She didn't let Klein continue hovering, explaining, or attempting to salvage the story through more contact. She sent him to his vehicle and told him to start documenting his actions while the details were fresh. That was a quiet move, but it was a strong one. It meant Chen expected his reasoning to be scrutinized. Jordan asked for the incident number and the supervisor's information. He also asked for the process to file a complaint and to preserve body cam footage. He didn't threaten lawsuits in the street. He didn't turn it into a speech. He handled it like a man who had done this kind of documentation for other people before. Chen gave him the information he requested. She also took down Jordan's contact details and professional info because she knew this wasn't ending on the sidewalk. Before Jordan left, Chen asked him to give a brief account while it was still fresh, where he was standing, what Klein said, what Jordan said, and what actions occurred before the cuffs. Jordan summarized it cleanly, focusing on facts, not feelings. He emphasized one point again. Klein had never clearly stated a lawful basis before escalating to detention and arrest. Chen then spoke with the cafe manager and a couple of staff members. They told her what they saw. Jordan waiting calmly, Jordan asking questions, and Klein escalating. She also noted multiple witnesses had recordings from inside the cafe and outside near the patrol car. Jordan walked back into the cafe for a moment, not to make a scene, but to close the loop with the people who had just watched him get cuffed in line like he was dangerous. The manager offered him water. A couple of patrons gave that quiet, uncomfortable solidarity people give when they're not sure what to say. Jordan didn't turn it into a moment. He nodded, thanked the staff, and left. That night, Jordan did what most people don't have the knowledge or patience to do. He filed a formal complaint in a way that made it hard to bury. He documented the time, location, officer name, supervisor name, and the sequence of events. He included the request for body cam preservation. He listed the cafe staff as witnesses and noted that bystander footage existed. He also notified his own chain of command, because federal agencies don't ignore incidents like this when one of their own was publicly arrested without a clear basis. Within the department, the first version of the story started forming fast, because that's what happens after a public incident. The paperwork tries to become the official reality. Klein wrote his report, and the problem for Klein was simple. The body cam existed, and it captured the parts that reports usually try to smooth over. The missing lawful basis, the escalation pattern, the moment he labeled resistance to justify force, and the fact that Jordan stayed controlled while the officer drove the tension. By the time Internal Affairs got the complaint, it wasn't just one person's word against another. It was footage, witness statements, and a supervisor who had shown up and taken the cuffs off after verification. And once that kind of file lands on the right desk, the next phase is never about feelings. It's about violations. Internal Affairs opened the case fast, not because the departments love bad headlines, but because this one had two things they couldn't outrun: a supervisor on scene who had reversed the arrest, and body cam footage from the first second Klein walked into the cafe. Jordan's complaint wasn't vague, it was structured. It listed the timeline, named witnesses, demanded preservation of video, and highlighted the core issue: detention and arrest without a clearly stated lawful basis, followed by escalation when Jordan didn't submit to an unexplained demand. That forced the investigation into a simple question chain. What specific crime supported arrest? What level of force was used? And was it justified? Did the report match the footage? Klein's report tried to frame the situation as a necessary control of a disruptive person. He leaned on broad terms like non-compliance and obstruction. He described Jordan as aggressive and implied the cafe scene had been tense because of Jordan's behavior. The body cam showed something else. It showed Klein initiating the confrontation, keeping his voice up, and demanding ID without articulating a clear reason. It showed Jordan staying controlled, asking for the basis, and offering verification in a safer way. It showed the escalation pattern: demand, pressure, detention language, physical grab, then immediate labeling of resistance to justify cuffs. It also showed how quickly the story shifted once the supervisor arrived and focused on procedure. Internal affairs didn't rely on one clip. They pulled the full body cam file, dispatch logs, radio traffic, and statements from the cafe manager, baristas, and multiple customers. They also collected at least one bystander recording that captured the arrest from a different angle, including how calm Jordan remained while being cuffed. Then they compared everything to policy. This is the part people miss. Investigations like this aren't mainly about whether the officer looked rude. They're about whether the officer met the legal and policy thresholds for what they did. The sustained findings stacked up: unlawful detention and arrest based on failure to articulate reasonable suspicion and probable cause; escalation inconsistent with de-escalation policy, especially in a crowded public space; improper use of authority, including turning a rights-based question into a compliance test; failure to follow supervision expectations, since the incident was already high risk before it became an arrest; inaccurate or misleading reporting, because the written narrative didn't match what the camera captured. There was also a credibility issue. Once the footage contradicted the report on key points, everything Klein claimed became suspect, including his stated reasons for initiating the contact. Klein tried to defend himself, the way officers often do in these cases, saying he felt threatened, saying he had to control the scene, saying Jordan's tone signaled risk, saying the crowd made it dangerous. None of that solved the missing foundation. If the lawful basis isn't there at the start, the rest becomes damage control. The department's command staff reviewed the IA file with legal. They saw the same problem IA saw. If this went to court, the footage would be played for a jury, and the city would be explaining why an arrest happened in a cafe without a clear reason being stated before cuffs went on. Klein was terminated, not transferred, not resigned, fired. The department cited the sustained violations and the report footage conflict as the line they couldn't cross. That termination didn't fix what happened to Jordan, but it did send a signal to every officer watching. Cameras don't just record suspects, they record decisions. Jordan didn't stop at the internal process. He filed a formal claim against the city. His case wasn't built on emotion. It was built on documentation, unlawful arrest, public humiliation, restraint without cause, and the risk created by an officer escalating in a packed cafe. The city settled. Settlements don't always mean someone admits wrongdoing on paper, but they do mean the city's lawyers saw the exposure and chose a controlled outcome over a public trial. The settlement included money, but the non-money terms mattered more. The city agreed to policy and training changes tied to the exact failure points. Clearer requirements that officers articulate the lawful basis for stops and detentions early, and that they document it consistently. A supervision trigger for public discretionary arrests in low-level situations, requiring a supervisor check-in when feasible before escalation, not after. A stricter standard for labeling resistance, including guidance that minor body movement, confusion, or reflexive tension could not be used as a shortcut justification without clear supporting facts. Bodycam audit changes, including random audits and targeted audits, when complaints alleged unlawful stops or report inconsistencies. A review process that compared arrest reports to bodycam footage in certain categories of cases, instead of assuming the report was the truth by default. Refresher training on detentions, arrests, and constitutional standards, with scenario-based work that forced officers to practice articulating the basis cleanly under stress. Those changes didn't erase the incident, but they changed what the department could ignore going forward. For Jordan, the outcome was complicated. He didn't want to be the example. He wanted coffee and a quiet lunch. But he also understood the larger point. Most people don't have federal credentials, the confidence to stay controlled, or the knowledge to demand proper verification without escalating the risk. Jordan kept working. He didn't do interviews chasing attention. He kept his focus on the job and on making sure the paperwork trail stayed intact, so the system couldn't quietly rewrite the event later. Sergeant Chen's role stayed important too. Her actions didn't just correct the moment. They created the record that made accountability possible. She arrived, asked for the lawful basis, verified credentials the right way, and separated ego from procedure. That kept the situation from getting worse, and kept the department from pretending it never happened. And Klein's firing became a cautionary lesson inside that agency. If an officer couldn't explain the reason for a stop, the stop shouldn't happen. If they couldn't explain the reason for an arrest, the cuffs shouldn't go on. If their report didn't match the footage, their career could end. Now here's the question for you watching. If you were in that cafe, what would you have done? Would you have recorded? Would you have spoken up? Or would you have kept your head down because it felt safer? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you've ever seen a situation where the truth was in the footage and accountability actually landed, share what happened. Or what? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications because these stories keep coming, and the next one is just as real.